US's aviation market is vastly different than that of the UK or even the rest of Europe. Regional flying in the US seems to be one phrase for two completely different kinds of flying. There's the more typical regional routes like New York to San Francisco or Seattle to Boston. These kind of flights are very similar to the typical short-haul routes airlines like EasyJet and Ryanair excel at. Then there's commuter routes, which are short interstate hops or flights that passengers tend to use to get to work or lesser demanded destinations. The kind of flights Flybe used to specialise in back in the day. Well, I say back in the day, I really mean like before last year. But why give you this very wordy and overcomplicated explanation of a very simple concept? Well, these two different kinds of flying have some very different regulations across the pond, and it's all to do with subsidiaries. In the US, it's common for airlines to have a main airline for short haul and a regional subsidiary for even shorter, low-capacity routes. To be fair, some European airlines like Lufthansa have a very similar structure to this with their CityLine subsidiary. All three major US carriers, Delta, American and United, have regional subsidiaries to operate these short-haul regional routes, flown under the names Delta Connection, American Eagle and United Express. However, these regional carriers aren't operated directly by the main carrier. Instead, they contract out regional flying to other airlines like Envoy, SkyWest and Commute Air. These regional carriers employ their own pilots and can operate smaller regional jets at a much lower cost than the mainline airlines, as they typically have a much larger fleet and can benefit from economies of scale. For example, the smallest jet that Delta operates is the Airbus A220 with 109 seats. But the smallest aircraft in their regional Delta Connection airline is the Bombardier CRJ200 with just 50 seats, or just under half. The main airline wouldn't be able to operate a plane with this little amounts of seats profitably, but the contractor carriers like Envoy Air can. Naturally, contracting out regional flying to smaller carriers is a massive advantage to mainline carriers, as it reduces their costs massively. No less because regional pilots are paid anywhere from half to two-thirds less than their mainline colleagues. However, this has led to a lot of worry coming out of pilot trade union groups, who are worried that their employers are contracting too much regional flying out to these regional carriers, leaving them out of work. This has led to scope clauses. Scope clauses limit the number of aircraft that US carriers can fly under their regional subsidiaries. For example, American Eagle can only operate 75% of the total number of narrowbodies operated by the mainline unit. These scope clauses also limit the amount of aircraft in each size category. For example, in American Eagle, large regional jets that seat between 66 and 76 passengers are limited to 40% of the number of narrowbodies, while smaller jets make up the remaining 35%. This limit varies between airlines though. United, as an example, can only operate 255 large regional aircraft. But why am I telling you this? Well, that's a very good question. Well, I don't know if you remember last week's episode, but I briefly mentioned that Envoy Air would be taking all 6 of BA Cityflyer's ERJ-170s to operate for American. Well, what I didn't mention is that American would actually be reducing the amount of seats on board these aircraft, from 76 to 65. But why? Well, so they can be classed in the smaller aircraft category of their scope clause terms. This change, although not ideal for American and Envoy, is a dream come true for passengers, as they get to enjoy more space and comfort. This kind of tactic isn't uncommon, with United also reducing the amount of seats on board some of their ERJ-700s to comply with the strict scope clause. The world of American aviation is definitely complicated, but nonetheless, still very interesting to read and learn about.